Okay, apologies about that. We were mid live stream and the bloody thing decided to crash. Internet decided to disconnect itself, which is absolutely frustrating. Um, that's just completely thrown me off. The technology has just failed, so that's really frustrating. We were discussing the Olympics in China and how the NHL and the NBA have put money into the Chinese market, and we were also discussing the European football receiving Chinese and Arabian money, and how, like, obviously, some people are saying that nations should boycott the Chinese Winter Olympics and athletes should boycott. Um, it won't solve anything. The Olympics will still go ahead unless something significantly changes between now and February. Uh, the NHL hasn't seen, I think, till January the 8th to make a decision in regards to the going to the Olympics. Um, and there's been criticism, of several high profile international sporting events going to certain countries, like Qatar getting the World Championship Athletics a couple of years ago, Qatar getting the Football World Cup, China getting the Winter Olympics. They got the Summer Olympics as well. The Summer Olympics in Tokyo going ahead under growing pressure, mostly internally in Japan, but also externally as well. Um, the handling of certain large profile sporting events in um, in recent years, both during the pandemic, before the pandemic, since the main wave of the pandemic hit. There's sport and politics is something that's in the spotlight at the moment, and the handling of certain things. Now, the the situation, as I say, well, before the live stream went wrong because of the internet connection, deciding apparently to disconnect itself, even though I was connected the entire time, which is absolutely frustrating. Really is. Um, yeah, like the NHL was not the first major sports league to chase the Chinese money. Um, as I say, European football was being open to the Chinese economy with Chinese money, with pre-season friendlies going out there, and Chinese money investing in the European domestic leagues for about a decade, 15 years or so now. It's not a new thing. These summer build up to how is it unstable? I've got full internet. This is absolute horse shit. Um, so yeah, the debate about should we keep sweep it's global sport. It's a global sporting event. But the issue with the NHL allowing players to go is actually down to the NHL and the IOC. Now the players basically would have gone on a player strike lockout, and we may not have had a season last year. And the NHL just could not afford the loss of revenue because there was no AHL play either, and there was no ECHL, so they couldn't afford the loss of revenue for the sport, considering they had a disrupted season the season before. So, in order to get the expanded playoffs in 2020 and then the season that we've just had on, they had to accept the players' point of view basically in a collective bargaining agreement. And we had similar discussions with the Major League Baseball with players wanting to play a certain number of games and the league wanting to play a different number of games, and retention salary and escrow payments and salary deductions and a whole host of other money issues where sponsorships now on jerseys, what fans think of that. I mean, as a European, I'm used to it. um, Quite frankly, if I was to show you some of my hockey jerseys, they're just covered in sponsors. I mean, as a European sports fan, we're used to having sponsorship on jerseys, and we have been for nearly 40 years now over here. I think the first sponsor to go on a jersey was in the 70s. So we as Europeans are very used to seeing advertising on sports jerseys at sporting venues on the sidelines for many years, 40, 50 years. It's more of a modern thing with the US and Canada. And it obviously, the North American sports market isn't particularly used to it. doesn't know quite how to deal with it. There's a bit of a meltdown in fandom. Uh, Over here, we're used to it, and we have been for a very, very long time. Um, I do think there's a bit of overkill with the amount of sponsors on jerseys now. It used to be just the one, now it's multiple. So more and more jersey space is being taken up by sponsors. I do agree with that. It has gone a bit OTT, but sponsors are paying less per ad basically on a jersey now. So to maximise the revenue, they are selling sections of shirt or jersey to sponsors, and the, 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 the the kits are less desirable. I think now. I wouldn't buy a replica kit now if I could avoid it. There's only a handful that still look pretty tasteful. You get to rugby league and rugby union, they are literally covered in in sponsorship. You get the ice hockey in Europe; it's more sponsors than jersey design. Um, and so yes, there is that debate with how much sponsorship you should put on. I know the NBA have set a trend. The NHL have also decided to get on that trend. Major League Soccer's always had sponsors on the jerseys, but the other sports are now starting to follow follow suit, um, and and that is in itself obviously very, very interesting. Now, yeah, as I say, political boycotts at the Olympics haven't stopped the Olympics before, um, not in the slightest. So it used to be European Jersey and esports, the NHL, okay, sponsor. Yeah, it's a trend. Well, look, again, that came up in the collective bargaining agreement. The players want a share of that revenue, um, and yeah, we were very lucky to get the rest of last season, the last two seasons played basically. Um, and yeah, I collect jerseys as well. I've managed to get my hands on some NHL jerseys, so it's not just a North American thing. I mean, I've got my hands on a variety of sports jerseys from a variety of sports. It's not just a North American thing. It's a hobby of mine. I haven't collected any sports jerseys in a few years now, but it is a hobby of mine. I've just taken a couple of years out of collecting. But I would say this: the reason why we got the return to play in 2020, and the reason why we got last season done, is the collective bargaining agreement, and the NHL had to give something back to the players, and the players were like, "You're giving us a share of the revenues made by the new advertising on the helmets and jerseys, and oh, we're going to the Olympics." And the NHL was not in a position to fight them on this one. Um, the the issue is, yeah, the IOC and the NHL. Partly it is to do with the TV slot. I don't know what the viewership figures were like for the last Olympics in Japan and the Olympics in Korea. I also don't know what the viewership figures were like for the Olympics in '98 in Nagano or the Beijing Olympics in 2008 for the North American market. Now, I do know I tried to watch as much of those Olympics as possible over here in the UK when I was younger, but obviously that proved somewhat difficult. Not going to lie. Partly because I had school, and I could only really watch the weekend's action. But then I didn't watch any of the Olympics that we've just had at all. I didn't watch a single Olympic event. I think I watched about 5 minutes in total. There were no fans there, so there was no atmosphere. So that was part of the reason behind that. But the it will be interesting. They have said that the jerseys for resale, for the jerseys that consumers can buy, will have no ads on. Now I don't know how long that lasts. I really don't. Um, Another thing that we've heard is the salary cap may go up by $1 million a year for the next couple of seasons. So there, instead of having a flat cap, there's going to be a small rise in the salary cap, which is not enough, I don't think, to with the current state of the game to be sustained. Players are going to have to take longer term pay cuts. Now, if they've deferred salary, they are going to have to get paid those deferred salaries in full. So the owners are going to actually be out of pocket at some point. Obviously, the gambling money is now open. So that's another income stream that the NHL and the NBA and the NFL and Major League Soccer and Major League Baseball and all the professional leagues in North America are now open to for the US market. Obviously, over here in Europe, we can bet on US. We've been able to, place a bet on the Super Bowl, the Stanley Cup final, the World Series for decades. If you think about it, we legalised, um, gambling in the sense of betting on sport, apart from horse racing and the dogs in the 60s. So we've had 50 years of being legally allowed to bet on sport. The US has had less than three uh, outside of the lotteries. So it's a new market for the North American sports leagues to tap money revenue streams. I do fear though with this with I'm not a big fan of gambling sponsorship and professional sport being so closely linked. There's been a big discussion over here in Europe about gambling advertising during live events, live matches on TV, and live streams on the internet. It only applies to TV at the moment, but when I've been watching, because I follow obviously the NRL, I pick up the Australian feed. There's a lot of gambling ads during live broadcasts. That would not happen over here in the UK. At least it shouldn't. Also, in France, you can't have alcohol advertising um, in regards to sport. That's not allowed. Um, um, so with tobacco advertising in the early 2000s, the French have gone a step further and said we're not allowing on any sports team or jersey or in stadiums any alcohol advertising. So they've banned alcohol advertising in relation to professional sport. There are growing calls here in the UK to restrict gambling advertising in professional sport, apart from horse racing and dog racing, because they're heavily reliant on that income. Without that income, those two sports industries will go under. But in other sports like rugby league, European football, motorsport, tennis, field hockey, ice hockey, you name it, all the other major sports in the UK, there's growing calls to restrict or ban sponsorship. We're seeing tournaments and leagues sponsored by gambling firms. We're seeing, I think it's about 30 or 40% of all professional football teams, soccer teams in the four professional divisions in England have got a major title sponsor being a gambling firm. So, and one of the leagues is sponsored by a gambling firm. So that is a major concern. We have seen a rise of it. So you take out the tobacco advertising 20 years ago, and that is a major revenue stream taken out of professional sport altogether. I mean, F1 clung on for a few more years because of the contracts that Bernie Ecclestone had signed. But apart from that, every other major sport, the tobacco advertising disappeared. And you can argue tobacco advertising and then obviously cigarettes being bad for your health and all that. And I agree. As a smoker, I actually do agree. I mean, it's not good for you. But that was a revenue stream hacked away from professional sport. And then for about 10 years, we had internet firms, banking firms, food company, your general everyday what you would buy in a supermarket or at a wholesale supply shop sponsoring sports teams. And over the last, I'm going to say 10, 12 years, it's been insidious. The rise in betting companies sponsoring more than just the horse racing and the dog racing. We're talking about, they've worked out that European football is the big market, rugby union, rugby league are secondary big markets. And to a certain extent, I've even seen it on motorsport now. And motorsport's not a big thing with gambling advertising on motorsport, but it's starting to seep in. And I've noticed it in the British touring cars, so our equivalent of NASCAR, basically. I've seen it start to slip in. It's got very big in Australia, um, with several high-profile gambling firms having major sponsorship deals with some really big teams down in Australia. And there is growing pushback um, against it. So we'll have to see what happens. I mean, crikey, if let's say, for example, pre-season match they want to play in Dubai. So rugby union, you play Sevens circuit. Dubai. Let's say a gambling firm is sponsoring one of the teams. They can't wear that sponsor in the stadium because of the laws of the United Arab Emirates are anti-gambling. It's against the law there. So that poses contractual headaches. Um, Technically, gambling in China is illegal, but not in Hong Kong and Macau. And snooker is another sport that is heavily sponsored. Used again, tobacco advertising was very big with 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 snooker until the early 2000s, and then it switched, and then very quickly it's gone from tobacco, a brief 5 6 year period where other firms were sponsoring the title events, to gambling firms. So I know snooker is not necessarily the most arduous sport in the world; it's more of a mental game. But it's a high profile sport in the UK. It's a high profile sport in China, and yeah, gambling firms have filled the gap. And you notice the amount of players with gambling sponsorship. It's generally quite worrying. And there's a lot of match fixing allegations with snooker and corruption around the game in recent years. So yeah, I totally agree as well. I have major reservations, and with the rise of gambling sponsorship, we're seeing the rise in allegations in sports corruption in across the board, across sports, across continents, and it does raise a lot of questions. And I'm in agreement as well. So yeah, concerns have rightly been raised by many, be it sports fans, governing bodies, or those on governing bodies. Politicians have got involved, public pressure groups. Now, I'm not anti-gambling. I'm not saying ban gambling because that just gives it to the organised criminals. We know what happens there. Um, but in regards to sponsorship, there has to be, and obviously, sponsorship revenues are down because many companies have obviously been um, struggling with finances over the last couple of years with what's happened and the economic downturn. But there has to be um, other advertising income streams for sport other than gambling, because they're made. I mean, yeah, they've made massive profits. Europe banning MMA games for alcohol injury. It depends on the jurisdiction. I've got nothing. Look, the French sports laws concerning alcohol are like tobacco. You're not allowed to have it. So when motorsport goes to France, be it the superbikes, the MotoGP, the World Touring cars, for example, anything like that, the F1, and there's a team with an alcohol sponsor, they have to blank that sponsor out for that event. Um, so when Liverpool famously had Carlsberg, which is a European lager, as their sponsor, when they played games in France, they had to play without that title sponsor. And I remember that when I was a kid. Um, because I had one of the Liverpool European kits as a kid. My mum still has it, so it's a horrific fluorescent yellow third alternate kit. Ugh. But in France, alcohol advertising in sport is banned. I think alcohol advertising on TV is actually banned in France, but that's a local law. Energy drink advertising, I think there's times when you can advertise it. I think it has to be after 9 p.m. in this country. Again, it depends on the jurisdiction, but because they're actually age-controlled products, so yes. But I don't think there's an outright ban on advertising them. It's just there's certain jurisdictions where you can only advertise after a certain time, in certain events. But motorsport and extreme sports, the energy drink companies like Monster and Rockstar and Relentless and Red Bull are key to the development of those sports. And without them, those sports wouldn't necessarily exist. So there's a sort of bit of, you know, economics there. They have invested. I mean, Red Bull and Monster. I mean, Monster owns several motorsport teams. The people who actually own Monster actually also invest in motorsport heavily. Um, and so, if you take that money away, people lose their jobs. So that they have to be very careful. It's a tricky one. One side news today in my life, my father got a locker from someone as part of a court win for not paying on a moving job he found. 40, 70 Australian hockey rookie card. Wow. There was that guy who sold his Gretzky rookie card for a couple of million Canadian dollars or something. So there could be a fair bit of cash. Um, Depends on the condition of them. Um, but there could be a fair bit of money there. So that's a fair court win for uh, 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 not paying a business fee. You could actually make more money than the job was actually worth just from the contents of what is in the storage locker. So that could be, and yeah, the old sticker book cards and the yeah the rookie cards and the season. We have them in card collections. We used to have them as a kid over here as well. In a variety of sports, mostly football. You still get the sticker Panini sticker albums, and you can get the trading cards as well. They're not anywhere near as popular as what they used to be, um, which is a shame. Um, I had a 2003 2004 Serie A sticker album. Um, so yeah, many 16, 17 years ago, I was trying to collect them. But yeah, it's not as popular as it used to be. But that was part of the reason behind the 94 player strike and the 95 lockout was the likeness of the players and the player cards not getting a revenue stream. So ironically, that links into one of the player strikes, and the first lockout was the revenue streams that actually came from the trading cards and their likeness and the sticker cards and their advertising likeness for you know the players not getting that revenue stream. It was going straight to the league, straight to the owners. So yeah, there's a little link into that. That was one of the reasons why we had the first lockout, which then led to the second lockout, ironically, which then led to the third lockout. All started with hockey cards. That was the catalyst where the players were like, "We're not getting the revenue stream from our likeness. This is our image. Um, we're the product. We are selling the game. We deserve a revenue percentage of the revenues on this product." And they went on strike, and then yeah, they had the first lockout, and then there were other issues that came out of that first collective bargaining agreement that went on to the second one, which went on to the third one, which has then led to this current collective bargaining agreement, sort of, because there's been a couple in a very short succession to get the game resumed after a pause last year. It all goes back to hockey cards, ironically. Uh, Parents used to have multiples of pretty much every rare collectible involving cards, comics, trophies, etc. in their young years. Net worth 5 million if they kept it. Lost it. Again, when it comes to insurance purposes, I mean, some of my collectibles aren't. I mean, I've got a few collectible items. I've got a lot of match day programs. That's a thing that's becoming fast a thing of the past. But um, some there are some within both European football and rugby league who want to keep the sports programs because again it's a revenue stream, and with revenue streams being reduced, they want to maximise their revenues as much as possible. Um, but I've got all sorts of um, bits and pieces, sports memorabilia from many days out. I've been to Anfield, I've been to Twickenham, I've been to a whole host of I've been to a few stadiums that no longer exist. The old Griffin Park at Brentford, they've got a new stadium now. But again, putting a value on things like that, obviously, collectibles go up and down in value depending on market demand. So they may have insured it for, let's say, 1 million. It's worth five all these years later if they didn't. So it is a shame that they've lost those collectibles. It is a shame. But then they've just found some in a lockup. So and they could be worth more than what was lost. So if they've got like some of these really rare things, the whole fraud stuff involving companies jacking up the price of retro games cards from 30. Um, I've heard of I wouldn't say fraud, but I was reading into the .com boom and bust in the late 90s, early 2000s, which I think is a little bit. I think about the time you were born, basically, because of your age. When I was a kid growing up, we had a couple of recessions, basically. One in the early 90s, where the housing market in the UK went tits up. Then we had the Asian financial crisis in '97, where the Asian financial markets went tits up. And then within a few years, the .com boom bust, which is basically a foretaste for what happened with the banking crisis 10 years later. Uh, Amazon nearly went bust. People were speculating very much like this situation on companies where some of these companies were making like a net profit of like a couple of $100,000 a year, and they were valued at billions when they could barely make any money. Um, and I was reading up on the dot com boom bust, um, and Google actually nearly went out of business, and Amazon nearly went out of business. These were some of the and Yahoo basically did. So these were the some of the companies that we see as some of the biggest companies in the world today nearly didn't exist. And yeah, it was to do with companies jacking up the price of overinflating their value and people over speculating. Um, so it's not anything market speculation and fraudulent market speculation. It's the reason why every 10 years or so we have, well, recessions basically. Is for some reason or another there's over speculation in a particular industry. So in this case, it's the collectibles industry. In the case we were arguing there, especially with sports collectibles, etc., being overvalued. But when it comes down to collectibles, especially sports collectibles, it does just depend on the market. Now that like Diego Maradona's passed away, there's a lot of people who will have Maradona merchandise and collectibles, um, and they probably will flood the market, and therefore the price will crash, which will lead to strains in the second-hand collectibles market, which is worth a lot of money. Um, and with what we've seen over the last 2 years of people, working from home, people, buying and selling to get by as a job. My neighbour does it. I'm starting to do it. Another friend of mine does it. Um, when you flood the market with an item, it skews the value of it. So if there's a demand for an item, I mean, me and my friend had two Betamaxes, and they were worth, if they were working, over a grand. One component failed, and I was about to salvage it. We could have made a £1,500, which is about 2,000 Canadian dollars. It went for a quid, went for a pound, which is about three Canadian dollars in the end. And all I needed is one little component. All I needed, and a soldering iron. And I was back by my mate up going, I can fix it. Get this component from this Betamax. We had two. Strip one Betamax for spares and put it in the other. And he was like, yeah, I've already sold it. I was like, dick. I was like, oh no, because that guy's going to repair it for 50p and sell it for 2 grand. And I was like, oh. So yeah, if you get that right collectible, that right rare item, you can make a lot of money. I've had a couple of rare items that I've sold, found, um, and yeah, I mean, the fact that people are deliberately inflating prices, market manipulation, that's technically it is illegal. But in a market like the second-hand market like that, there is no real regulator for it. Um, so it is a problem. It's slightly off topic, but it goes back to um, yeah, market manipulation. I could discuss that on the other channel, really. But it all ties back into when the players in the mid 90s were like, we want to get our money for our likeness in the NHL, which led to a player strike and three lockouts, basically. And that's the whole seed of the player discontent is revenue sharing. And so, as we were talking about the sponsorship on jerseys and the revenue streams from that, gambling revenue streams, allowing the players to go to China, it's all about money. If I'm in a good position in the future, I would start collecting cards and such. Don't really want to otherwise outside the odd esports hockey jersey for fun. Um, I'm thinking about downsizing my jersey collection and my memorabilia collection, starting to sell some of it off. Um, I, I've, I've sort of lost my love for it, if that makes sense. And you know, it well, not necessarily. You can find. I mean, I found some Transformers collectibles for real value, cheap value, but in reality, if you clean them up, they're worth money. But again, it's again on market demand and depending on what item you're collecting, um, that's what it boils down to is the current state of that collectible market. Um, but I wouldn't say it's ever too late. I mean, I I wouldn't say it's too late. I started collecting, you know, sports jerseys when I was 5. Got my first um, sports memorabilia when I was 5, and I've been adding and subtracting from what I had in my personal collection ever since. That's nearly 27 years as of my birthday. My 5th birthday is when I got my first collectible when it came to sport. That's you know, I'm 32 in just over 2 months. So 20 odd, oh god, five, that's 27 years of collecting since the mid 90s. So um, that's scary thinking I've been collecting sports memorabilia for 27 years, but I have. I still have my 1996 Premier League annual signed. Um, my rucksack with the original Premier League logo. My original Blackburn jersey, still got that. Um, I still have my 2006 2007 season jersey, although that is not in a state worth any money. It's falling apart. I've got my 2007 Italy Rugby World Cup jersey, which again is not in a good condition because I used it when I was playing rugby as a training jersey, so it's got some damage to it. I've got a whole host of hockey jerseys. I've got a couple of NFL jerseys. I've got sports programs. Um, I've got a book signed by the late great F1 commentator Murray Walker. Um, I, I've got I've got a fair bit. It's just terrifyingly scary that I've been collecting since I was 5 years old, and I'm nearly 32. Uh, well, I don't think any collection's ever fully complete. I mean, you watch the hockey guy; my collection's fully complete. Um, ever. He's even admitted there's a couple of jerseys that he can't justify spending the price for at this current time. But no collection's ever complete. I don't think anyone will ever be satisfied with what they have. Um, in saying that, um, yeah, it was a hobby of mine. I'm starting to declutter. I'm going to be slowly and surely um, selling, I think, over the coming weeks and months, some of my collectibles. Just yeah, I've lost my love of collecting stuff now. I did, especially during the last decade, have a major love for it. It was a good hobby when I was going through some tough times, but in my 20s, yeah, that was kind of fun. Now, not so much, and it just is what it is, really. At the end of the day, like obviously, I would love to keep doing it, but I haven't got the money and I haven't got the space and I haven't got the interest. As I say, I mean, it was fun doing it, and I might get back into it. My collections have gone up and down with the amount of jerseys. I mean, I've got less jerseys now than what I did 3 years ago, before the pandemic. Um, I had more, um, and I have, yeah, my collection has gone up and down. That's not to say that 5 years down the line, I might not get, in a better financial situation and a better situation and collect more again. There's nothing against that. It's just thinking where to house them and how often will I get them out? Like, should I frame them? Um, it. But sports memorabilia or any memorabilia collecting, it can be worth. I mean, my granddad, and this is going to make my late grandfather had a collection of 200 teapots. Yes, he collected teapots for 50 years. Bizarre, isn't it? He was a quirky individual. He collected teapots. Um, Bizarre, that, isn't it? My other granddad, who recently passed away, collected books and films. Um, and so therefore, it all depends on if you're into that kind of hobby. Personally, myself, I'm going to go through a big clear out. I mean to do it for 12 months since I moved into this current flat. Um, and I think a lot of my collectibles may be put up for sale, which is a shame, but I've had fun collecting them. It's been well worth every penny I spent on them, new or second hand. I have no regrets in collecting when I did at the time. Um, and yeah, it is what it is. You know, uh, I've got a massive DVD collection. I've got DVDs down there in storage. I've got DVDs behind me, as you can see over on the table over there. I've got books, as you can see on the chair over there and behind the bed behind me. I like, yeah. I mean, I don't have a Kindle. I don't. I read the hard copy of a book. I don't like going on an Amazon Kindle or anything like that. I think it devalues the written word. Um, you know, I think we are becoming as a society, so lazy and reliant on the machine um, to do the work, and we've lost. I think as a society, we've lost a step when it comes to ingenuity and creativity, and we are getting lazier as a society. I mean, when I was a kid, you know, rain or shine, if I could, I was down the local playing fields, um, you know, playing kickabout, five a side, get football, and even in my early 20s, me and my mates get on the phone. Right, we're going down the local AstroTurf. We're going to have game of five a sides football, and just don't do that now. Um, COVID notwithstanding, it just doesn't happen. Like it would be nice to where I used to live. I used to live right by a rather large park, couple large parks. When I used to walk from my house into town or go to work, I would pass by or come home from work. I would pass by playing fields that you had people playing cricket, touch rugby, football, and packed, packed. Last few years, until COVID, less and less people were out there just with their mates, you know, having a kick about, playing, a bit of cricket, playing a bit of touch rugby, playing a bit of footy or soccer as you would call it. And it's something I've noticed as time has gone on. You're seeing less and less kids and adults, just a bunch of mates, having a bit of a kick about. We used to do it um, all the time, just go down the local park with a football, um, with a rugby ball, with a, you know, whatever, frisbee, seeing it less and less. And that was before the pandemic hit. I was seeing it less and less, and and I think the advent of technology where you can sit at home and video game, which I have nothing against. I used to be a heavy gamer myself, on my Xbox and telly are over there. Haven't plugged them in for over a year, so all those updates. But yeah, long story short, I would happily sit on the games console, and I think that's happened a lot in the last 5 6 years since I've had the Xbox and the telly and all that. Again, I've been happy enough to just game, sit on the console and go online um, rather than go for a kickabout on a summer's evening. and meet up with my mates for a little bit of frisbee or football. I'll more than happy sit on the games console, sit online and not do that. And that fills me with a rather a sense of a big sense of disappointment and um, shame in a sense. I'm not proud of not doing that as much. So, and that's where we come back to the grassroots. Kids playing the game for the first time, player development, youth development, grassroots development of sports across the board and why we have issues with the obesity crisis in some demographics in the Western world. Um, well, I don't know about you in Vancouver, but where I live in the south of England, there is a big debate about youth facilities when it comes to sport, and and also there's been studies done that show, particularly in young women, and we're having the debate about women's sport and the criticism they face and the lack of opportunities that are starting to grow now with women's sport is between the ages of 16 and 18 is where there's a big drop off in young women participating in sporting activities, be it just recreationally or actually in an organised sporting setup or recreational setup where they're actually playing for a team in an organised competition, or individual sports like golf and tennis. And studies have been done, and government studies have been done, and independent studies have been done with universities and research think tanks, and for a variety of reasons, there is a massive drop off. And of participation and involvement, even if even if you don't participate as an actively participate in the sport, involved in the administration and the backroom day to day running of a sports organisation, especially in women from the ages of 16, 18 to, well, when that drop off happens, it's very hard for them to get back into the sports industry, be it as an administrator, in the backroom side of things, or actually participating in organised sports leagues and events, or just recreationally. There's a massive drop off. The same can be said for some socio-economic and minority groups in the men's side of things as well, from certain aspects. And these studies have been done. And as I say, when I locally to me here, there's not a lot of open spaces for people to, have outdoor recreation activity that's sports based rather than walk. Where I live right now, where I used to live, there was more sports facilities available. But yeah, there is a debate about the reduction in publicly accessible land, so playing fields over here in the UK over the last, I'm going to say 30, 40 years. It's been a slow decline in the amount of land set aside as playing fields. Massive reduction. And obviously, yeah, I don't know what it's like. I mean, you're saying it's pretty good in Vancouver. I obviously don't know what it's like in that part of the world. But as I say, where I am, we have got some good mountain biking trails. We have got decent facilities, I would say, to a point, but we've lost one of our local ice rinks. We've had issues with the several sports. We've lost one of our local swimming pools. We've lost one of our local cricket clubs. We've got uncertainty over the future of one of our local football clubs. We've had issues with the maintenance of some of our other sporting facilities in recent years, and one of the local authorities has a contract with a private firm that is failing to meet its obligations. One of our other local ice rinks, there was issues with the redevelopment. There's another local ice rink which is in concerns about its viability and its safety. So one local ice rink is lying locked up, disused, perfectly viable, and it's probably going to get turned into unaffordable housing. We're having a housing crisis. Another one is I would say is unsafe. It's still open. There are concerns about these. These are where the professional teams play, and also ice rinks can be for public use as well. There's a lot of concerns in regards to another ice rink where this team now plays in the next big town up. There's concerns about the local authority having funding issues, and it is partly owned by the council as a council-owned building by local government, and they're £400 million in debt, and they're trying to asset strip, sell loads of assets off. So there's concerns about the long-term future of that facility. Even though the refurbishment's brilliant, it's a profitable facility. The pandemic, it doesn't matter if it's professional sport to grassroots sports facilities, has highlighted financial mismanagement of the grandest scale. It does suck. It does. One of the local golf courses that I used to work at is now a housing estate. It's gone. Which all that's left is the driving range, which is a massive shame. That went several years ago now, but there were ongoing debates about the legality of the contract to develop the land and all that. That's now a housing development. And people are going, we have an obesity crisis. Well, when you're allowing private or publicly owned facilities to go and less of them to be available, it does create a legacy of a generation that are going to have health issues, a weaker, when we talk about professional sport, a weaker talent pool for those sports. A less healthy population, which also then affects the amount of people who are available to do coaching. It means there's less fans as well for sport, because if you're not interested in playing it because you don't have that opportunity, you're less likely to want to watch it as well. That's one thing I found. The grassroots is, I think, far more important than what you see at the top level on the TV. Without the grassroots, you do not have what you get at the end product. So if you didn't have the grassroots in the ice hockey, you wouldn't have the NHL, because the draft system, there wouldn't be enough talent pool to keep replenishing the playing ranks. If you get rid of the minor leagues or some of the minor leagues in Major League Baseball in their system, the AAA leagues and all that, and the regional leagues, if they start failing and teams go out of business and less kids are picking up a baseball and a baseball bat and a glove and playing, eventually the product top end will fail. We're seeing the situation with the professional structuring in rugby and what I call football, what you call soccer in North America, what we call the pyramid. With what we're seeing with Derby County and what we saw with Bury 2 years ago, is if the bricks at the bottom are pulled out of the structure, the building will eventually fall in on itself. So you've got what we call the football pyramid. We've got football clubs and rugby clubs in both league and union, and to a certain extent ice hockey as well in this country, where grassroots level and the semi-professional and the amateur teams right at the bottom where you develop players are going under. They're either losing their facilities, so there's concerns about where they can play. So they're losing the facilities that they play and train at, to not being able to put teams together for various reasons. Can't afford kit, can't afford groundskeepers, can't afford maintenance on those facilities if they do have club facilities. And eventually that does affect the top end. So even in the professional side of things, you need to have a healthy grassroots structure and a healthy lower league structure to support the top end of the sport. And when the lower levels start struggling, doesn't matter if you're in a franchise system or a promotion relegation system, when you take some of those building blocks out of the structure, it weakens it. And for all those saying, "Oh, we should have, streamline, we should, you know, shrink the game down, reduce the size." There are some saying, reduce the size of the NHL again, stop expanding, stop growing the game. It's dilute the product. In the short term, yeah. In the long term, it actually benefits, but that's another argument. Um, you know, there are long term concerns about the viability and the health of professional sport. Buffalo, the fan base, however, in Buffalo for the Buffalo Bills and the Buffalo Sabres, they keep turning up. And the Buffalo Bills are a pretty decent side at the moment. Sabres, it's shambles. But locations like Buffalo, they have stuck by mediocre teams for forever. There's something in the water near Niagara Falls in Buffalo. They are very passionate fan base. We have the same debate over here with Newcastle United and Newcastle in England. The team have not been good for a very long time, and the owner is not a good owner. But it was only until the last 2 seasons that the fan base started to boycott games, and they stopped selling out the stadium. They can seat 56,000 people in their stadium, and it's only been in the last couple of years where the fan protests have finally gone, well, we're going to walk out en masse, or we're not going to show up. Um, so it's only been in recent years that it's if Newcastle United can't sell out to James's Park, the day that happens over a long period of time that's when there's something gone horribly wrong, and it's starting to happen. Um, but obviously, the sports culture in North America is different because of anything. I'm just moving the team, whereas here it's more community based, promotion relegation, um, and so it's a different sports culture. And communities buy in. So there are some fan bases that they may be small fan bases in the global fan base, but locally they will sell out their stadium, they'll sell out that arena, and have queues outside to get tickets. Um, so they'll be oversubscribed. Um, but there is I have to admit, yeah, some concerns with some, but it it's partly to do with, yeah, the I can't see the Sabres or the Buffalo Bills ever moving from Buffalo. Um, I just can't see it happening. Um, but strange things have happened. The fact that those two teams have had a significant lack of success, and the fact that the last time either of them made it to a championship final was 1999. So 22 years without reaching a final in the leagues that they played in the postseason. That in itself is, and never actually winning um, even a regular season title, um, is absolutely stunning to me. Um, so they haven't been very successful. I mean, Buffalo had, I think, back to back to back Super Bowl. I think 3 Super Bowl appearances in a row, or 4, 5 in 6 years, or something. There was a period of time where the Buffalo Bills, were regularly making the Super Bowl and just couldn't win it. Um, the Sabres, they've had a couple of Stanley Cup final appearances, but again, like it's like Vancouver and the Canucks. Difference is the Canucks have got President's Trophy. The Sabres don't have a President's Trophy, so there's your difference. Um, the Vancouver Canucks in the regular season actually have got some success. I don't think Buffalo ever got a divisional title either. Never been first in their division, so I think Vancouver have got that as well. But it is an interesting question. It's an interesting topic. Um, I can't see the Bills or the Sabres relocating anytime soon. Um, but you know, again, the North American franchise model is alien almost to us Europeans to a certain degree. Um, in saying that, rugby union um, has started to bring in the franchise model, but apart from that, it's just the sports culture is different. Um, but I also argue that the draft system actually rewards failure. I think when you've got a draft lottery, I think it should be a pure lottery. Completely, every team has an equal chance. You put all the teams into a hat and put them out as random. Um, that would be my solution to it. But obviously, the way the salary cap and the rules are set up is to even out obviously the league. But you actually really look at it, um, the league isn't as even as it should be um, in terms of revenue and spending power and that kind of ability to attract higher profile assets and players to your location. I think this is where, apart from Montreal and Toronto, that hampers the other Canadian teams in the NHL, and partly due to the higher tax rate. So when it comes to free agency and trade deadline day, that has an impact because of the Canadian dollar at this point in time. If it's the other way around, then yes, you can get those free agents. Um, and there was a brief period where the Canadian dollar was better currency to have, but then it comes down to the tax laws and yeah, the it does, and the way the salaries are paid in US dollars. So at the moment, it actually costs more to run a Canadian team than a US one in the NHL, in the NBA, in Major League Baseball, Major League Soccer, Major League Rugby, you name it. It costs more to run a Canadian team at this current time economically because of the currency exchange than I think 10 years ago. I think 20 years ago as well. It was the other way around. It cost more to run a US team. Uh, but that's the issue of having a league covering a couple of countries. You have a different currency. You're not paying in the same currency. You've got to exchange that currency from Canadian to the US dollar, and there's a penalty there on the exchange rate. So at the moment, it costs a Canadian owner more to pay his players than a US owner. Now, at some point, the Canadian dollar will swing the other way, and it will cost the US owner more to pay players than Canadian owner. So there is that economic impact that hampers things. Um, yeah, I think the Australian AFL and NRL model are slightly different. The AFL has a draft system. The NRL, obviously, it's a bit more. Each NRL team is given a geographical area in which they can basically promote through their youth systems, um, and then even then, those youth players can go on to junior contracts at a rival club. Well, I think they're about 16, 17. They can go over to another youth system. Um, that's where the NRL salary cap is a bit more flawed than the AFL salary cap, and why we keep seeing rumours about salary cap breaches and teams being over the cap, and there's ways around it because the cap system is actually set up with a draft principle in mind, and they got defeated in High Court. Whereas the AFL, their salary cap works with the draft system. So interesting that may be and is. Um, uh, that's an interesting subplot, and we can discuss. I mean, salary caps. We're trying to. I mean, I think with European football, salary caps are going to come at some point, and if not salary caps, a different spending cap kind of rule, because we have financial fair play as the system in European football. It doesn't work. UEFA have admitted it doesn't work. The domestic leagues don't properly enforce the rules. Um, we've seen some rule breaches that have led to some financial problems with Derby County because of their stadium issue, which came about because they were trying to comply with the Football League rules when it comes to financial sustainability rules, which are badly enforced and weakly enforced. So it is what it is. I mean, we can discuss, obviously, uh, yeah, as I say, with the NHL, a third of the league is over the salary cap at the moment. In the NRL, people are still going. with Melbourne Storm, especially with how they kept their players together, how they're able to keep so many star players together at the Melbourne Storm while they're still over the salary cap. The whole Parramatta situation about 4 or 5 years ago, the Canterbury Bulldogs, at the beginning of the 2000s. I think the New Zealand Warriors had a salary cap breach that was reasonably high profile. So there's been several, and the way the NRL has dealt with these salary cap breaches is complete contrast to how the AFL dealt with the Carlton salary cap breach and said we're going to punish them so severely that no team will ever want to do it again. Same with Essendon with the peptide scandal. We're going to punish them so severely that they're never going to want to. No one's going to want to cheat like that again. So I think the NRL, when it comes to governance, well, under Andrew Abdo and Peter V'landys have definitely strengthened the sports governance in the last 2 years. They are still lacking in a lot of areas in comparison to the AFL in strong governance. And I'm going to do a review on my thoughts on the NRL season before the grand final. I do think some of the rule changes that they have brought in and some of the question marks over the officiating and the match review committee when it comes to suspending and fining players for foul play. There are some question marks over the consistency, the quality, and how the NRL has dealt with the Magic Round in round 10 and this crackdown on foul play. It didn't last very long. There were several hits today in the Melbourne Penrith game that in round 10, their sin bins, we would have 5 or 6 sin bins if this was Magic Round. So I've always said this. I know when you get into post-season play, and you know it's a very intense. It's a bit more intense than regular season. But if it's a penalty or it's foul play, it's considered a suspendable offence in round 1. It should be a suspendable or penalised offence in the grand final. There should be no difference. The consistency must be the same throughout the season, from the first minute of the first match to the last minute of the last match. And then, for whatever reason, you get people going, "Oh, but it's a grand final, or it's a preliminary final, or it's a conference final, or it's a playoff game. Oh, you've got to let that go." It's like, well, no. This is where it confuses new fans to the game. So if you want to grow a sport and expand a sport, this is where it does confuse some fans. It was like, well, I was watching the game beginning of the season, which that was called as a penalty. Why is that not a penalty now? Or that wasn't a penalty at the beginning of the season. Why is that a penalty now? And then I was watching the game today, and yeah, they weren't calling it the same as they were calling it at the beginning of the season. They definitely weren't calling it like they were calling it like Magic. We were told at Magic Round this crackdown will continue for the season. So for the next 15 rounds, it didn't. After about 3 or 4 rounds, they dropped off in calling those penalties, those sin bins, those reportable offences. What was the point of the Magic Round crackdown if it's not going to stay long term? If you want to get reduce head contact or penalise high contact, dangerous contact with the head, or foul play in general, which leads to injury, stay consistent. That's something that really pisses me off. Like it's not just the NRL that does this; it's the NHL as well. We've seen it in the NHL. We've seen it in the AFL as well. If you follow the Aussie rules, we've seen it in regards to other sports when it comes to consistency of officiating. There is too much variance in interpretation. We've heard the term referee's interpretation of the rules. A hit to the head's a hit to the head. How can one referee say that's not a penalty when another referee says, it's a penalty? Or when one referee goes, I'm putting you on a report for that, where you're being sent from the field. Or put on a major penalty if it's ice hockey. It pisses me off. Interpretation. I can understand some referees refereeing less strictly in a sense, but when there's certain bits of the rule book that bang, hey, especially with dangerous contact, be it to the head or foul play, it needs to be called. You cannot have interpretation. You've got a league saying we are cracking down on this type of behaviour. they need to be consistent with it. So when I come to review the NRL season, while I'm with the NRL, I'm praising the 6 again rule. I like that. Um, I like I'm preferring the one referee system a bit more than the two referee system. Um, I think that's changed how the game is officiated. Um, I am liking the style of play that we've seen and the speed of the game, or the perceived speed of the game, the fatigue factor. The 18th man, I'm open to debate on that one. But when it was brought in, we were told, oh, it's a 1 in 1,000 incident with the Cronulla situation. Actually, the 18th man has been activated several times since then, which then says to me that they haven't reduced the amount of concussions and head knocks or high tackles. The crackdown obviously hasn't been as effective because there is still that foul play within the game. Um, the fact that they didn't proceed and continue, I think they went a bit over the board with the high contact, crackdown. They could have been a bit more sensible with it, but they should have done that in round one of the season. Then I don't like rule changes being brought in or rule interpretations being brought in mid-season. If you're going to bring them in the pre-season, form the teams, players. This is how the game is going to be called in this regard, in this area of the game. So bringing in rules midway through the season, I think that's reactive policy. I think that's a weakness of the NRL. With the rule changes they brought in after the lockdown last year, after the 8-week lockdown, in regards to the 6 again and the single referee and all that, I can understand why they did it at that point. But some of the tinkering with the rule changes this year, and then new rules like the 18th man will be brought in. They're doing it on the fly. They're doing it as a reaction rather than looking at the rule changes last year and the impact it had on the game. But I think you need to slow down some of the rule tinkering and rule changes, allow these new rules to bed in for a season or two, and then see if they have the desired effect rather than after a couple of rounds. That's a negative, I think. It doesn't help. In regards to the NRL bunker and reviewing plays and its remit, I think they do need to get ex-players involved. I think they have in the past. In regards to officiating, again, ex-players who may have retired young or not needs to be involved. I think in the match review process more and the officiating more, because that gives a feedback from the player's point of view. So they need to look at recruitment of referees. The technology they have. I think we've come too far to wind it back. I think it's here to stay. Well, yeah, everyone's got their opinions on the rules that we had in 2019, 2020, and 2021. I think the goal of some of the rule changes is to get the wrestle out of the game, which is a Melbourne Storm tactic, and a few other teams have done this tactic, and that was in response to how the West Tigers played in 2005. So over the last 15 or so years, the play the ball in the ruck area and the tackle has become very slow, and it's not a good view. If you want to try and grow the game and speed the game up and make it more exciting, you need to get that out of the game. I think the amount of people who are like, yeah, this is a negative to the game, it needs to go. I think the rule changes are helping and get rid of that somewhat. Because every team has started to do it, and it does detract from what I believe should be a very fast-paced, entertaining game. And people are going or getting these blowout score lines. We're getting very lopsided score lines. There is clearly a gap appearing between the top 5-6 teams and the rest of the league. So there's question marks about how well is the salary cap being enforced. The way that each club is given a catchment area in their location, plus a catchment area in the country areas as well to recruit youth talent players. Should there actually be a draft system in the NRL? The NRL took that to court. The clubs took it to court and won. But the salary cap system works with a draft system. Um, there's also question marks over the role of player agents in the game. Just look at George William and John Bateman. I'm a Raiders fan. That left a bit of taste in the mouth. Um, you know, uh, so the role of player agents has been raised over the last couple of seasons um, in the media and on social media as well. The question mark should the NRL bring in a draft system? The salary cap is set up for that. That's why it's not a fully effective rule. Um, the salary cap model is set up for a draft system like the AFL. They're trying to base their salary cap model on the AFL, and the clubs and went to court over it and won. The league lost in court. Um, well, some fans, say they prefer the rules in 2019. Other fans are saying that I like some of the rules. I don't like how some of the refereeing consistency and the officiating when it comes to suspensions and how they grade the the, the charges. Like the Latrell Mitchell situation, the whole situation, play should have been stopped dead straight away. So that debate over the Latrell Mitchell Joseph Manu situation, and I have told people who missed that incident and people who may not watch rugby league to watch the incident and make the opinion up for themselves. Um, uh, the the way that was dealt with on the field wasn't great. The fact that Latrell Mitchell should have been sent rather than sin binned, and that is an agreed consensus, and then was able to still have an impact on the game later on in the game in the second half. Uh, the fact that that was his third suspendable incident of the season, and he got the lower end of what was expected. He was facing 6 to 9. He gets 6 weeks. And that was his third suspendable incident of the season. The debate about loading, points loading. Um, the same debate happens in the NHL when it comes to players like Tom Wilson, Brad Marchand. They're regularly, Milan Lucic. There are several players that have got a dubious. Zach Ronaldo, for example, have a dubious suspension record, and are repeat offenders when it comes to foul play and suspendable incidents. Again, there needs to be consistency and there needs to be transparency in how um, the match review committees, the citing commissioners, all that, go about issuing punishments for foul play and suspendable offences. Some of the fines that are dished out, and it's a finable but not suspendable offence, are really, really pitiful. But that's it's worked out as a percentage of income. So if you're a player on a lower salary, the fine actually hits you more in percentage of income, but it's still ridiculously low. The more salary you get, the bigger the fine is, but on percentage of income, it's actually pretty small. So it doesn't really affect the players when they're getting fined hardly anything for a finable offence if it's not suspendable. But there needs to be some sort of clarity and transparency because fans are going, well, why has this player got a 3 week suspension whereas that player's got 6 for basically exactly the same incident? And let's say there's an incident in the grand final, for example, which is similar to the Latrell Mitchell with Joseph Manu, and the player gets a lesser or more punishment, a different punishment, suspension, then you'll get the question of consistency. If the Latrell Mitchell situation is worth 6 weeks, and that was the lower end of the scale of what was expected, there's a similar incident in the grand final or at the beginning of next season, hypothetically, where that player gets, let's say, less weeks or more than what Latrell Mitchell got, and that's regardless of if that player has had previous suspendable offences and loading. Major eyebrows will be raised in regards to the process behind the match review committee. Now, we do know that there's going to be end of season review into the disciplinary side of the game when it comes to officiating and suspensions. There is going to be a review, which happens every season. I think this season, this what comes out of this review is going to be more newsworthy than in previous seasons. So that's a watch this space in regards to the post season review by the NRL, in regards to the match review committee and the referee. And the rules review. The end of season review the NRL is going to do is going to be much more newsworthy than um, last season, the season before, etc., etc. It's going to be very, very interesting what comes out. There is going to be a review into the use of the bunker and the technology when it comes to assisting the officials. So we'll see what happens there. But if a similar incident, I'm going to say this with in regards to what happened with the Latrell Mitchell Joseph Manu with a high shot that leads to a severe injury. There is a similar incident in next weekend's grand final or beginning of next season, and that the player involved who's committed the foul play gets less or more than Latrell Mitchell. So we're saying less than 6 weeks or more than 6 weeks, regardless of previous suspensions they have had. Then, yeah, question marks will be raised and questions will be raised about the consistency when it comes to the match review committee. Like Kane Evans, he's been suspended several times this season. Matt Lodge, there's been a few others who've had a fair few suspensions this season. Etherington, if one of those players was to commit the offence, or conversely, a player who hasn't had any track record in being suspended does a similar incident and gets more than Latrell Mitchell, then I'll be asking questions over the consistency of suspension and of how they work it. So that's something that I believe is going to be reviewed at the end of the season, in the post-season. So other sports news is breaking over here, but it's 11 o'clock over here. Oh, I've also got some. But yeah, there's a lot of questions in regards to officiating. Also, the debate about vaccinations of players in regards to getting COVID vaccines as well. Who made the more disgusting off-season moves, Montreal, Carolina? Kotkaniemi going to Carolina. That is interesting. We'll have to see how that all plays out. But Samu Niku has been picked up on waivers by Montreal. Now, whether Montreal allow him to go to Europe, because I think the intention was he wanted to go back to Finland to play. As a Jets fan, I feel sorry for Samu Niku because he's quite a talented player. He hasn't been given a fair crack, I don't think. But Montreal pick up Niku on the waiver wire. Carolina obviously offer sheet Kotkaniemi, and he had a very good playoff performance, but his regular season play hasn't really, hit his stride. I think this season will tell if those particular roster moves have panned out. Marc Bergevin, especially, is a general manager always under constant pressure. There was a couple of years ago, he was looking like he was going to lose his job, and then the Max Pacioretty situation, with how that was dealt with, and him going to Vegas and moving on, and the team missing the playoffs a lot, and they haven't been in the PK Subban trade, and a whole host of how he's dealt with the roster, and the contract Carey Price. Is that just a dead weight over the team? I mean, Carey Price had a brilliant playoffs, but if he's injured, that is a huge. If he's injured or loses form, that is a massive financial burden on the salary cap. D'Angelo and Malou. I mean, D'Angelo obviously, much like Evander Kane, uh, not well liked by his peers. when it comes to Malou, I mean, obviously there's Jake Vertanen, and there's a few other players who've got some pretty dubious off-ice incidents of a legal nature. When it comes to rather serious allegations against them. Again, until something's they may have served their time, but I always go back if there's anything to do with domestic violence or violence against women. Slava Voinov. That is where the league stands. That's the precedent that was set 7-8 years ago with Slava Voinov and the domestic violence allegations against him. He hasn't played since. And if there's any allegations of violence against women and any kind of violence domestic at all against women, because we're receiving some players who are in the closet here. But any allegations of domestic violence, sexual violence, anything like that, I stand by what they did to Slava Voinov. He hasn't played since, and that is the precedent. I know each situation is different, but that's the precedent there. In the D'Angelo situation, he's just a toxic individual. And he's not. He's like the Evander Kane of the Rangers. His teammates didn't want to play with him. The way the Rangers dealt with that situation was a mess. The fact he's been given a contract, that's up to Bergevin, and I forget who's the GM at Carolina, but he wasn't deregistered by the NHL. The NHL didn't suspend him, saying you can't select this player to play for you. He's an eligible free agent. So the NHL, as I say, haven't deregistered these players. These players haven't been suspended in any way. They're still eligible to play. There's nothing stopping them from playing. There's obviously been a lack of interest in Europe to pick them up. They haven't been, as I said, they haven't been deregistered, and even if they were deregistered from playing, they can challenge that in court. So the NHL haven't blocked them from playing. It's like Slava Voinov, I think, has never reapplied to play. I think he was slapped with his suspension, and he was suspended, but was still able to receive his contract. There was a deal done there, but he's never played since. So again, it is what it is. What do I think about the Panthers win versus the Storm? I think that I'm glad the Melbourne Storm are going to win another premiership. I'm not a fan of the Melbourne Storm. I'm a fan of some of their players. I like Nico Hines. I like Pappenhausen. They've got some good players individually that I cheer for and I want to see do well. I like the fact that Harry Grant, as a young hooker, is getting a lot of time in the game as a number 9. I like the cheese. I like Brandon Smith. But I'm not a fan of the Storm. I would like to see a new name on the trophy. Now, South Sydney, first grand final since 2014. Penrith. But to be fair, this is not the grand final people were expecting. But that Panthers Storm game was a carbon copy of Parramatta Penrith last week. But Souths have figured out a way to beat Penrith, but no team has ever conceded 50 points and gone on to win the grand final, and they did that in two rounds this season where they shipped 50 points. So history is against South Sydney in that regard, but they have figured out a way to beat Penrith. But then Parramatta figured out a way to beat Melbourne, and we're out, week 2 of the final. In somewhat dubious circumstances in regards to some controversy, and the same thing happened in the early bigger part of this game where, again, the trainer stops the game. And Christian Welch should have been off the field straight away with that concussion. They waited 7-8 minutes before he went down the tunnel for his HIA, which he then failed. So, and how Jerome Luai passed his HIA after he was knocked cold as well. There are some question marks about, again, player safety. Who do I think will win the Pacific Division in the NHL? I'm going Vegas in that one. That's the weakest division in the NHL by country mile. You've got an expansion team in there. You've got several teams that, with the rejigged playoff format last year, were not even close. Who had horrific seasons. Yeah, I think is what it is. Pacioretty move was going to give. I feel sorry for Max Pacioretty in that regard. I really do. The media is toxic. The fan base is toxic. The minority mind. The media constantly is obsessed by having a French-speaking coach and general manager. I would think you would want the best person for the job, regardless if they're from Quebec or not. And that obsession, I think, is harming the team. Um, the, the Carey Price contract it's like Di Pietro all over again with the Islanders, which has, well, still hanging over the Islanders now. I think they're still paying up that contract all these years later. Um, that's 1/8 of the salary cap locked up in one player who is nearing the end of his career now. His career is on the back end, gets injured almost every season. Um, his numbers aren't. I mean, the rest of the playing group, as in all the players, still vote him the best goaltender in the league. And okay, he hasn't won a Stanley Cup. I think he's got one Vesna trophy in there. So, and there are some other good goaltenders in there in the league. That is a heavily weighted contract, and for a Canadian market as well, where it actually, in theory, costs more to pay your players. Now, I know it's Montreal, and the Molson family are one of the biggest, wealthiest families in North America, so they have got some punching power behind them financially. But in a salary cap league, when out of your entire roster, 1/8 of your salary cap is in one player's contract. 1/8. It's like half the salary cap of Toronto is wrapped up in four players. I mean, Carl Dubas and Marc Bergevin have made some really stupid contractual decisions, and this is pre-COVID. But those contracts don't age well at all. And yeah, who do I think will win the grand final in the NRL? I think it's going to go to Golden Point. It's not going to be done in the 80 minutes. Sorry. Penrith in the regular season, destroyed South Sydney. Souths in this final series have turned it on, but they didn't blast Penrith off the field in round one. But Penrith have found a way to, like, they're battle hardened now. Melbourne proved that week off didn't help them. It hindered them, and Penrith have proven in a must-win game, two must-win games in a row, under the pump, under pressure, they can do it. Their defence is terrifying, and I do think, even though with South Sydney's left-hand side, without Latrell Mitchell in there, and with Adam Reynolds not being 100% fit, Taff, while he said, "I'm not Latrell Mitchell, I'm a different fullback." He is, and he shouldn't be compared. He's only had 7, 8 games of first grade, but he is a different style of fullback in the sense that he's smaller, he's slighter, he's got a bit more pace to him, a bit more slight of foot. Um, that in itself, if Penrith can defend like they did today and they did against Parramatta, it doesn't matter that Alex Johnson is going for 30 plus tries. Um, it, I can see this being uh, a brutal match. And Souths have to play like they played in the first round of the finals. If it's the Souths that played a Dubbo, or the Souths that played in the second half of the season when they got battered by Penrith as well, they couldn't deal with the high ball, uh, they're in trouble. But Mansour and Latrell Mitchell aren't in the side. They've got a new winger and new fullback who have got far less experience. You they could target them again. This is a big must-win pressure situation, and these are the two best halves combinations in the league. These are the two best halves combinations in the league. So it really comes down to, will Cody Walker implode under pressure because he can let his temperament get the better of him? Is how fit is Adam Reynolds? We know he's got a groin problem or a thigh problem. And if Benji Marshall has to come on, let's say one of them has an issue in training and Benji Marshall play 80 minutes, can Benji Marshall play 80 minutes? It's going to be interesting. So there's some fitness issues for both sides, actually. which could determine the outcome of the game before we've even kicked off. But I also think Penrith have played under pressure now for 3 solid weeks. They knew they didn't have to win game one, but they had to win their next game because it's straight knockout. And they've won the next 2 games, which are straight knockouts, under intense duress. And that Parramatta team, I think, could have won that game. And if Parramatta won that game, they know how to beat. They've got Melbourne's ticket this season. So Melbourne just were off the pace. What do I think about the London Broncos becoming part time again? Very worrying now. It's not just the Broncos; it's a whole host of teams that are in right up the financial creek, so to speak, without a paddle. There's discussions of possibly shrinking the Super League, which I honestly think will probably damn near kill the game. There's a couple of teams in League One and in the lower amateur levels that have gone under. It is very worrying that they've gone from a Super League team that gave it their all to the Wolfpack going out of business, at which point I felt Broncos being the last team that were relegated from the Super League in regards to being replaced by the Wolfpack. They should have gone back up. Their youth development, the team that took the field the last season they were in the Super League, I think 8 of the starting 13 were London born and bred or Southeast born and bred to this part of the world, came through their academy. That raises concerns about growing the game outside the M62 corridor in the north of England, which I think is vital. With the World Cup being delayed by a year, I can see more teams going under. They might, if they merge with the London Scholars, they can pool their resources, and then we can just have a London team that's full time again. But I can't see that happening. But yeah, it is very worrying that they're now part time and not all their players are fully professional now. That is a symptom of the state of rugby league in the UK. It's not in a healthy state, and it hasn't been in a healthy state for a while. Very few of the teams turn a profit. Heavily gate driven league, heavily reliant on gate receipts and fans, and the TV deal is absolutely shocking. The fact that any team that does a sports documentary or fly on the wall documentary generally has a pretty shocking season. We've seen it with the New York Rangers have done it. I believe, was it the Nashville Predators have done it, and look what's happened since then. The West Tigers have done it. Sunderland Football Club have done it, and now the Maple Leafs are doing it. I don't. I watched the West Tigers one and thought I'm not a massive fan on these fly on the wall documentaries. Because I think it actually become when the team doesn't perform, and the Sunderland Till I Die. I mean that is just it's painful viewing. I feel sorry for the fans. I feel sorry for the fans. I feel um, sorry for the employees. I feel sorry for some of the players as well who've gone through that carnage. And it's one of them. I won't be watching it. Safe to say. Do player awards in sports have any meaning to you, despite voters getting it wrong a lot or no? If you were to ask any professional athlete who plays in a team sport, not necessarily individual sports necessarily, but team sport, would they rather their team win the competition they're playing in or individual awards? They always say team comes first. There's the occasional player who goes, I want to win everything, that kind of ego where it's a team sport, but they want the golden boot or the Dally M in rugby league or the Conn Smythe and whatever, or Rocket Richard. And those individual accolades, they do boost you up a little bit. It depends who's voting. On them. I don't. The Dally M's, it's the media who do it, and there's a committee. I do believe players should have a say on their peers. Quite frankly, I think players should have a definite say on who wins, but also you've got to look at goal scoring. It's goal scoring, plain and simple. Amount of goals and assists, points record. Again, pretty simple. Um, but in my opinion, individual awards it's generally skewed. If it's the best all-round player, it can't come down just to goals and assists and tackles or hit. I mean, um, yeah, I think when it comes to looking at a player's career when they retire and their individual awards, that does tend to say how good a player they were, regardless on how they were awarded them and who voted for them. If you're looking at an individual player and they've got, they've been voted best in their position or best player of the year or top point scorer or top goal scorer, try scorer, whatever it may be, um, that's a general. You could argue, okay, this player was the best player for a period of time or one of the best players. Um, I think the controversy when it comes to rugby league is when Tommy Makinson won the Golden Boot a couple of years ago, and and Sean Johnson, he can be a bit outspoken, New Zealand rugby league player, um, raised the question about how's he won it. He doesn't play state of origin, and you've got so there is that. Then you've got the Man of Steel award in Super League. I think that's for the most minutes played or something, or most consecutive games. There's various individual awards in uh, again. Um, it depends on how the voting is worked out and who is the ones tallying up the points and working out who's eligible for what individual award. Um, I think London or Toulouse should have been gone up instead of Lee Centurions. The Lee Centurions have won one game. Um, they should never have gone up, but that's the old boys club. That's the Super League RFL old boys club. Um, basically, uh, yeah, that doesn't sit well with me. Doesn't. Um, look, for me, Toulouse have been the best team in the championship this year. I think they're the most consistent team for many years. They deserve a crack at the top flight. It grows the game in France. It's very popular in France, even at amateur and semi-pro level. The fact that the French domestic league isn't very strong is a shame. There's a lot of political side to that as well. That's very historical, goes back to World War Two with the Vichy government and stuff. So it's a very touchy subject. But in the southwest of France, both codes of rugby are like a religion, more so than football, soccer. So there's a good player base and fan base there. It's developing that and growing the game in France further afield and improving the quality of French rugby league to the point where it's on the same level as French rugby union in financial clout and international level when the national side is able to battle against the best in the world more competitively. But yeah, I don't agree that Lee Centurion should have got it. There was about 8 clubs that put forward bids. London Broncos were one, and I think if the Broncos had been awarded the bid, they A would have been more competitive, and B wouldn't have had to go to part-time status for this following season for financial reasons. I don't think that's going to be a permanent thing, um, but it is a symptom that a very solid former Super League side, a very solid team as part of the fabric of the game in this country. Maybe not the most successful, but they've been a solid piece of the, the masonry, so to speak, the building blocks of the game. Um, has had to go past time. It says that the rugby league is in not great health. It's struggling at this time, and it's not doing as well as the RFL and the Super League are claiming. And there are some very worrying signs about the state of the game and the health of the game, and the fact that the Rugby League World Cup was meant to grow the game. and when it was awarded, and then they had the the stadiums all set up, and the locations they chose for training camps and match days, and the fact they were given no choice because Australia and New Zealand pulled out, and the way that was dealt with was uh, not that long, the other week. That was really badly handled by the ARL, the New Zealand Rugby League as well, the NRL. The players wanted to go. The fact that the players weren't fully consulted, but the players' union weren't overly happy. But there's been various issues with the Players Association and the ARL Commission this season um, since the Magic Round. Um, that's something to think about. But then what we've actually seen in the last few hours is the England women's netball were touring in New Zealand and Australia. They just completed their tour of New Zealand, and they pulled out of the tour, the section of the tour in Australia because of the COVID protocols that keep changing, which then raises questions about the Ashes and whether England and the Ashes series are going to go ahead in Australia this winter or summer for you guys in the Southern Hemisphere. Um, and with what's happened with New Zealand and England pulling out of touring Pakistan with the cricket and the T20 Cricket World Cup, and there's concerns about that going ahead. The ICC as a international um, governing body is under a lot of pressure right now with several concerns about various international tours not taking place that are key to their money making. At the moment, Luongo didn't not only win the Hart but the Vesna in 2007. Marty Brodeur there is no doubt he is one of the best goaltenders of all time, and you know fully deserves the accolades he got. And yeah, you could argue he's possibly the best goaltender of all time. You could also argue the defence he was playing behind as well might have helped him a little bit in the style of hockey that the Devils were playing, but you cannot argue um, he's one of the best goaltenders of the modern era. Luongo as well, if he had played on more competitive teams, hadn't spent much time in Florida, could you argue he might have won some more? Possibly. He's one of the most, again, you've got two of the best goalies of all time. One has actually won Stanley Cups, one has. One's appeared in Stanley Cup finals, but hasn't actually got over the hump. But their games played, wins, playoff wins, their stats. I mean, Cujo, Curtis Joseph isn't in the Hall of Fame. How? I have no idea. So there's always the debate of over Brodeur, over Patrick Roy, and Luongo. Should he have won awards? And Carey Price, is he really the best goalie right now? Considering he's actually never won the Stanley Cup, he's come close. He's not quite got over the hump. Again, these questions are always being raised, but yeah. There's also, I believe, the Warriors look likely to be starting next season in Australia as well. That'll be 3 seasons without going home. Um, there are calls from some quarters to completely relocate the Warriors to Australia and rename them and relocate them to the Central Coast permanently. I do feel sorry for those players that are joining the Warriors next season. The So in the New Zealand Warriors, their situation, without them, the competition doesn't go ahead. But the ongoing situation there, they haven't been back to New Zealand. Now for them, they're in the off season, so they're both the New Zealand based players can go home to their families. Um, well, obviously, it'll be interesting to see what happens next season. But from what I've read and what I've seen in the media, it looks very likely they're starting next season in Australia as well, back on the Central Coast. There are calls from some quarters to permanently relocate them to the Central Coast. But yeah, that situation is ongoing. It all depends on the Tasman travel corridor, which has been suspended because of what's happening in New South Wales and Victoria in regards to the pandemic. Um, the vaccination program as well. It's one of them where New Zealand has dealt with And people were saying Australia dealt with the COVID pandemic really well last year and the beginning of this year, and kept the numbers low. And it was only the state of Victoria that had problems. The last 4 months has shown that actually they haven't dealt with it as well as they thought they had. Um, they obviously didn't have it as under control as they thought they did. Um, Unreported cases were still in the community the entire time because they've got some of these variants that, with closed borders, you shouldn't be getting, and restrictions you shouldn't be getting. Their vaccination program was very slow in the rollout, and that's a political situation. That's got nothing to do with the NRL or AFL. But the Warriors situation is watch this space. How long they can stay over here because it's costing the NRL money to keep them here in Australia. Sorry, not keep them here. I'm in the UK, but to keep the Warriors over outside of New Zealand in Australia and have them hosted on the Central Coast is costing the NRL money. Um, Part of the resumption of play last year and this season, where initially it was for the first 7 rounds provisionally, and then it got extended longer onto the whole season. To keep them over here is the NRL had to go, we'll pay the money basically to keep the Warriors here in Australia on the Central Coast. Um, so to keep them in Australia is costing the NRL money. So how long that continues is we'll have to wait and see. I don't know how long that can be sustained and continued. Personally, that's open for debate. But yeah, that's the situation. It won't happen. The Warriors being permanently located in broadcast paying 17 million. Well, obviously Sky of New Zealand they're part of the negotiations with the broadcasters. Um, but if the travel situation and being forced to play games here long term, then there's going to have to be a discussion. There has to be a discussion at some point. Personally, the fact that there is a TV deal with Sky in New Zealand as a broadcast partner with Fox and Channel 9 as part of the broadcast agreement. I believe their partnership with Fox actually because the Sky brand. Um, and the fact the TV deal had to be renegotiated last year during the pause of the 8 week shutdown. Um, again, it is a complicated situation. I'm not saying, yeah, just relocate them. But it's a very complex situation. Every state and territory has their own restrictions in place. Um, Northern Territory, Western Australia, South Australia, and Tasmania, there's hardly any restrictions at all. Queensland, there's a few restrictions in place. New South Wales and Victoria are, a complete shambles. Um, and yeah, we're looking at later on into October before restrictions in those parts of Australia are eased significantly. Um, Obviously, the grand finals of both the AFL and NRL being moved to new locations. The whole competition of the NRL being played in Queensland for the last couple of months. The fact that at one point there was concerns that the competition might not be completed when a couple of games had to be rescheduled for the Monday. When the Rockhampton game, I think it was South Sydney were about to play a game, and the game was called off at the last minute, and threw the competition up in the air. There were two games that were called off at the last minute, um, and were rearranged because of changes in the quarantine levels, and you know there was panic over like will the rest of the season get completed. The AFL obviously having to move their grand final to Perth, then the rescheduling of the game today and moving it forward a couple of hours so it didn't clash with the AFL grand final. Um, So there's been lots of logistical nightmares for both the AFL and the NRL this season, um, with the state of Victoria and now New South Wales basically being shut down, and the fact that both seasons have completed um, without too much incident. Um, I don't think any players have tested positive. So the bubbles that the health protocols that the AFL and NRL agreed with the state governments have worked. There have been some question marks about how the quarantine, hotel quarantine for players' families and players in Queensland was dealt with the NRL. Obviously, the AFL playing, across the country, including Western Australia and South Australia, and having teams based there and having to relocate teams and the logistics. It's been Sky New Zealand has a separate company from Fox Sports Australia. One other thing they're not publishing this company is the name Sky. The brand Sky was owned by Murdoch at some point. They do have some kind of agreement with Fox and all that. The Sky brand name used to belong to the Murdoch News Corp, but they've all been sold on. But there's basically historical links there. But in regards to the TV deal, obviously they were renegotiated last year. Get the Warriors playing was integral to the competition. Um, it looks very likely from what is being reported at the moment they're going to start next season in Australia on the Central Coast. Now they can all go home to New Zealand now, and then return for the pre-season quarantine and then start playing again. But we just don't know what's going to happen with the quarantine rules in Australia in the coming weeks and months. And by the time next season rolls around, pre-season February, March, so in 5 months' time, um, what things are going to look like in 5 months' time? We don't know what it's going to look like by Christmas. So when the pre-season training starts again, they're going to have to, I think it's 8 weeks before the season starts. Or 8 weeks before the season started this year, the Warriors players were already back over in Australia in the pre-season preparations. Um, yeah, but the AFL, I mean, they're playing in a different location. They would normally be playing in Melbourne. The conditions are different in Perth. Weather conditions are different. The temperature at this time of year is different, and that'll have an impact on how the game is played. At the same time, of course, the state of Victoria has basically been in a semi-state of lockdown for a year and a half now, pretty much. Um, Again, we don't know what it's going to look like come the AFL and NRL pre-seasons in February, March next year when we're preparing for the leagues to resume and the 2022 seasons to kick off. We just don't know what things are going to look like come next season. And the AFL themselves, well, I'm not a bigger fan of the AFL. I like the AFL. I do like Aussie rules. I don't watch it as much as I used to. The AFL and NRL have done logistical feats of at the last minute, relocating in the NRL's case, an entire league structure to Queensland and all that infrastructure, putting it in place. That's an amazing piece of, logistics by the NRL. We have to see what it looks like, next year. The grand final being played in Brisbane. There were question marks raised about that. People are saying should the grand final be put on a rotating cycle like the State of Origin being on a rotating cycle with one game being played in each state, where a city bids. But obviously, I think for the next 25 years, the grand final is meant to be played in Sydney, and that's contractually agreed. This was a one-off situation. So they've just extended that contract by a year. Um, the same is said for the grand final with the AFL. I think that's a long-term, ongoing contract. There's going to be questions and raised about should we take the grand finals of both the AFL and NRL on the road and rotate them around the major, stadiums around Australia. Um, and that's a question that's been asked. Or should the NRL all completely relocate to New Zealand for next year? That was raised as well. Should Australia continue to have COVID problems, whereas New Zealand seems to have got it under basically hardly any restrictions, high vaccination rates. Um, should the NRL relocate to New Zealand for next season? That has actually been raised as an option by some. I'm not sure New Zealand has the full infrastructure to host an entire 25 round plus state of origin competition, but will be interesting. Um, but the NRL is not as reliant on gate receipts. The clubs are. The NRL as a whole, I think most of the money comes from the broadcast revenue, but fans at games does impact to a certain degree financial health of the NRL. So yeah, we'll see. We shall see. Right, I've been going for nearly 2 hours. I actually have to go now and sort out some food shopping. So thank you very much for being part of the stream. Apologies for the first stream, just the internet packing in. Don't know what happened there. Technical failure. Thank you very much for participating. I've obviously got some videos to plan out and do over the next day or two over this weekend. But thank you very much for watching, and I'll have some more videos obviously for you very very soon.